And so there is increasing pressure to adopt the patrilineal principle again. I would like to point out one thing to you before I continue with this. Please note the following. Nobody is really asking to adopt the patrilineal principle. Nobody! You know why? Because adopt the patrilineal principle means that if the father is Jewish, the child is Jewish. But if the father is not Jewish, the child is not Jewish, even if the mother is Jewish. What people want today is either or. Could be Jewish either patrilineally or Jewish matrilineally, and either way to be Jewish. There is no precedent in Jewish law for such a theory. That would be the adoption of an unprecedented position. It's not so easy to adopt an unprecedented position. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just making sure that you understand that it is unprecedented. There's no such thing. I hate to be quite so blunt about it. I do not wish to be part of the blame for forcing the Jewish world to make that horrendous decision about whether or not a whole group of people that who call themselves Jewish, we will have to say, we do not consider you Jewish. And to tell you the truth, everyone, I must tell you, I don't feel guilt when I say to a Reformed colleague who says to me, I thought you were a pluralist, Roth. My answer is, you got the wrong pluralism. I recognize your right to be right for you. I do not recognize your right to impose your right on me and expect me to accept it. In the same way that you made this decision to accept patrilineal Jews without asking my permission. You weren't going to let me impose my view on you. I'm not going to let you impose yours on me either. Especially since it's solvable by conversion. But I have to tell you, everybody, that's easy for me to say. You know what it would be if I were me. I'm a professor, we sit in our ivory towers. You know if I were a congregational rabbi. And some couple came to me, and it became clear to me that this 22-year-old woman who wants to be married has to be converted. And for 22 years she saw herself as Jewish. And I now say, but the sorrow, you've got to go to the mikveh and be converted. Yeah, it's an easy solution. But it's psychologically devastating. This woman has thought of herself as Jewish all her life. There's no way that I am prepared to add again to the splitting of the Jewish people by my accepting a change in how to define who is Jewish. An 1800-year uncontested precedent is to me a critical thing, even if I know that historically the patrilineal principle existed in biblical literature. I can't do it, and I won't. Good. Let me add one PS, and then I open it for discussion if you still are talking to me. Here's the BS. I'm going to do it anyway. I may be sorry, but I'm going to do it. Add to this the other dimension that is being forced upon the Jewish world by an ideologically consistent decision of the Reform movement. Namely, not requiring a get to terminate a marriage. The Reform movement does not require a get to terminate a marriage. You know what that means? I can solve it if they did patrilineal. I can take the person to the mikveh and make them a convert. It ain't easy, but I can do it. If a woman got remarried without a get, I mean, she was married once, she was married before, Jewishly, got remarried, got divorced civilly, got remarried Jewishly. The children of that second marriage are mamzerim to me. Because the marriage was never terminated halakhically. Now, is the Reform movement being consistent? Of course it's being consistent. Internally, ideologically, consistent. I don't deny that. But how dare it demand of me to accept as valid for me just because they accept it as valid for them? I recognize the right of the Haredim and Me'ah Sha'arim to insist that men and women walk on different sides of the street, in public streets in Me'ah Sha'arim. I recognize their right to demand that. But I don't recognize their right to demand that of me on Eimim Rafaim. That's a street near where I live in Jerusalem. They're being ideologically consistent. I think they're wrong. But if they want to be ideologically consistent in that way, that's their right. But they have no right to demand of me to do just because they think it's right. And the only reason I can get so vehement about this issue is precisely because it is the Reform movement that has undone what were universally acknowledged Jewish requirements. And I said to you earlier, and I repeat it and I mean it, those who change the precedent are responsible for its consequences. I am responsible for the consequences of me personally. I mean, not only me. The consequences of ordaining women in the conservative movement. You bet I lose a hell. You bet I lose some sleep over that occasionally. I really do. But I did it, and I'm responsible for the consequences. But I ain't going to be responsible for bifurcating, dividing the Jewish world so that one half can't consider the other half as Jewish. No matter how strongly I would like the children of these intermarriages to feel part of the Jewish world, I'm going to insist that they require a conversion. And even if their father is Jewish. I won't do it any other way. So Shia Cohn said at the end of his article that the jurist has to decide the law. The jurist, the judge, has to decide the law, not the history. I know the history, but I'm not called upon to judge the history. I'm called upon to make some type of a legal judgment. Last comment, then I open it for discussion. I don't even remember exactly how many years ago it was. It's got to be about 10 or 12 years ago. And the Reform movement, I don't remember exactly when they adopted patrilineal descent.
30 years ago.
How many?
30 years.
30?
3 of May.
3 of.
history of May.
Okay, it was not that long ago that the law committee of the law committee in New York began to discuss this question. But the law committee, you know, it could be doggone close, come to think of it. It's probably in the 90s. It's probably in the 90s that the law committee discussed this. I have to explain one thing to you. You know, when the law committee of the conservative movement has a divided vote, as long as 6 members of the law committee agree with some position, that's considered to be a validated position of the law committee. So if there are 25 voting members, in theory, you could have 4 positions on any given question. It is very common for us to have 2. Not so common to have 4, but it is very common for us to have 2. All right? What's more, everybody, the law committee is a consultative body. It is not the Supreme Court. Its decisions do not bind every rabbi. Any rabbi can either decide among the decisions validated by the law committee, or any rabbi has the right to say, all right, I heard their counsel, I reject their counsel, I'm going to decide whatever I decide. The only exception to this is what is called the passage of a standard of rabbinic practice. A standard of rabbinic practice means a decision of the law committee, which the law committee, by a big majority, votes to adopt as mandatory on all conservative rabbis, on the threat of expulsion from the rabbinical assembly. And once the law committee does it, it has to be taken to a convention of the rabbinical assembly, and it has to be accepted by the membership of the rabbinical assembly as a standard of rabbinic practice. The law committee, whenever it did it, it probably was in the 90s time. Maybe even been earlier, for God's sake. I mean, maybe it is 30 years. That's when you get older, that seems like less time than later. Anyway, the law committee adopted a standard of rabbinic practice, saying that no conservative rabbi is entitled to recognize anybody as Jewish on the sole basis of the Jewishness of that person's father. It's a standard of rabbinic practice. Any conservative rabbi who does is subject to disciplinary action, including expulsion. And thus far, to the best of my knowledge, no conservative rabbi has accepted anybody on the basis of patrilineal descent. That does not mean that there isn't a tremendous amount of pressure. There's a huge amount of pressure on the law committee to reopen and reconsider this issue. Whether it will or it won't, I do not know. And if it does reopen it, I am not providing any guarantee of what the decision will be. I can't do that. And here's my last statement. I do want everybody to know that I speak to you only in my own name. I have no official capacity to say I am speaking on behalf of the conservative movement, or I am speaking on behalf of the Jewish Theological Seminary. By God, I hope I am. I hope that I am speaking on behalf of the conservative movement and the Jewish Theological Seminary. But I have no official right to be doing that. I am speaking to you as a rabbi of the conservative movement who teaches at the Jewish Theological Seminary, who was a member of the law committee for over 30 years, and who was invited to come here to teach. But I'm speaking entirely in my own name. And now the floor is open.